Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Thursday, July 21st. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris back here with you. Island Eno has returned to Eno at home, and it turns out Island Eno is one of our listeners' favorite characters, I guess we could say we have on this show.
Yeah, shout out to our YouTube commenters. That was pretty funny.
So that keeps us laughing. Keep the comments coming on YouTube. You can ask questions there. You can always email us, of course. ratesandbarrels@theathletic.com is the email address. But on this episode, we're going to take a look at some second half storylines, kind of a second half preview. We're going to take a look at some pitching workload concerns. Lots of pitchers that really fall into that. There are obviously the young pitchers who just haven't thrown a ton of innings in the past, complicated even further by the absence of a 2020 minor league season. We'll talk about the older pitchers who might have been dealing with major injuries in recent years who are pushing their workloads up. And then some of the in-between type players. I think Nestor Cortes kind of fits into this sweet spot of someone that hasn't been a starter for a full big league season before, but appears to be in that role and thriving to the point where we just wonder, what does August look like? What does September look like as those innings continue to pile up? We'll take a look around at a bunch of different categories, looking for some help for your rosters as the second half gets underway. We got games again on Thursday, which I got to say, the Wednesday after the All-Star game it's a lonely, lonely day if you are a baseball fan. You go to the app, you go to the TV, and you just look, and you're like, this is weird. Like something's missing. There's just like a part of me that's just gone when we're
I just take the whole day off, mostly because I've just come back from covering, but also because it's a grind of a season, it's a long season, and then thirdly because I don't really care about the ESPYs, so yeah, there's not really a lot of sports on that I care about, so it's a day to watch other things. Watch Murders on the Orient Express last night.
Yeah, what's with the murder stuff lately? I've been watching Only Murders in the Building. That's been
I started watching that on the flying that I was doing. Yeah, that was fun.
It's a good show. I've enjoyed it so far. I'm through the first season, so if you are picking that up or have already watched it, no spoilers, please. I'm not a crime podcast person, but maybe on the brink of becoming one. Maybe that's an off-season project. Maybe we'll have a Rates and Barrels murder mystery episode at some point in the winter.
Are you advocating for a murder here?
No. We'll save that for the next lockout 4.5 years from now.
Yeah, right.
Who killed baseball?
Who killed baseball?
That's not much of a mystery. I think we can figure that one out right away. But we'll start with the pitching workloads. I think the young pitchers in particular, this is a group of players that every single year you look at and you say, great, I've done well. I've got Spencer Strider on my roster right now, or I've got George Kirby on my roster right now, or I've dodged a few raindrops with Mackenzie Gore and have been really happy with what I've got from him so far. But what's going to happen in mid-August, late August, or September when those guys are maybe just out of innings completely? And I think it's always complicated by each team's individual situation. I think in Atlanta, we've talked about them on the 3-0 show as a team that might benefit from adding some veteran innings to keep both Strider and Kyle Wright healthy. But I was doing some research before the show. Kyle Wright threw 143 and a third innings last year between two levels. So I don't think there's that much of a concern with him. But Spencer Strider was at 96 and a third innings last year. So they have to be very careful with how they get him from point A to point B, assuming he's a huge part of their plans in October, which there's every reason to believe that he will be. What do we do? Do we use the Stuff Plus model? Do we try and look at other trends? Like what's going to be our North Star as we decide how to manage some of these young pitchers throughout the second half?
It's completely lame, but the only sort of snippet in like viewpoint into this decision-making process by the pitchers, by the teams, has been that old adage from Alex Anthopoulos that I quote all the time. He said in a press conference to everybody, amazingly, that when they are deciding about their pitchers, they just kind of add 20% to last year's innings, and they only do it because that's kind of what people do. I'm willing to go to 25%. It's just easy math, and I think it represents some hopefulness. And then also, I'm willing to go to 25%, an extra 25% over the year before, for teams that are winning. So, we went through the list, and for an example, is one of the players on the list, Roansy Contreras, is over his innings limit already, or is it innings limit from last year already?
Well, yeah, he lost time to an injury last year, which really
Mm,
complicates how hard they're willing to push him because he finished with 61 innings in
mm.
21. I don't think you look at that and say, well, we can only give him 15 and a third more this season. That's not going to work because you're never going to get Roansy Contreras through a full big league season if you advance him like that. And I think he's a little easier to deal with just because instead of having a lot of missed starts between now and the end of the regular season, it's probably just you're going to go every fifth day. You're going to pitch as much as you can, and then you're going to hit an endpoint, and then we're just going to shut you down for the season. The schedule management for the contending players and the workload management within starts adds two layers that are more complicated. That's just so with
Yeah,
Contreras,
it's
it's more just
true.
like
But the Contreras
when
is
do
in
they
the minor
stop?
leagues right now. So, I did make the decision to try to hold on to him in a couple of leagues because I thought he'd be back up.
Well, that's
But looking
100%
at it,
roster management, though, because George
yeah,
Kirby went down too. Like that, they're not. Those two teams are not actually demoting those guys.
yeah. But what's Kirby's number at compared to
Kirby
last
is
year?
at 91 innings through the first half, and he only had 67 and 2/3 innings in games last year. I think he had some injuries in the minors as well. So
Oh man,
that
this is so
situation is a little
tough.
worse because the
That's what I'm
Mariners are
saying.
in
The
the mix for the
Mariners,
wild card.
yeah, and they're gonna want him for the postseason even, and I think that complicates Strider too. It's a little bit like McClanahan last year, or you know, any number of players where they're young, and then they also very good, so they want them for the postseason if they're a good team. So, I mean, it's a lot of different directions, but I think I generally, if they had a fair amount of innings last year, I'm willing to add 25%. So for Strider, it actually looks like maybe 103 or something last year.
Yeah, I had 96 and a third with my back of the napkin math, but around 100.
Around 100. I think they could push him to man, could they push him to 150? It's at
Counting the playoffs,
75.
I think that's probably fair, and that's the hard part,
That's
counting the
counting the
playoffs,
playoffs,
because
which
you
is
assume a
an
deep playoff
indeterminate
run.
number too, right? It's
Mhm.
so I think another 50 innings for Strider is possible, and that would be another 10 starts.
10 5-inning starts generally is I mean, it the other part of this I don't like, I don't think innings are the way you should really track
Oh
workload.
yeah,
Pitches thrown
I
matters
do.
more.
Yeah, pitches, and then also, I do think the more advanced teams are tracking them through their sort of health stats, their peripheral stats, stuff that shows up in their bullpens, their movement profiles, and maybe stuff, like their stuff plus in general. But I would have to say that like we look through some players, and almost all the guys that are running up on their innings limits are down in stuff plus. So Contreras is down 1 point, 1.1. Keegan Thompson's down 1. Josiah Gray is down 1.3. Aaron Ashby is down 1.5. Mackenzie Gore is down 2.4. Spencer Strider's down 4.5. Joe Ryan's down 5. So that's a bunch of names that we care about that are near their innings limits, and they're all down. It does matter, I think, that Strider was a reliever before, and that his after in the before-after scenario is still 136 stuff plus, which is the best stuff plus among any starters. So I think we're not as worried about him. But Mackenzie Gore went from 100 stuff plus to 97 basically. And we've seen it in the results as well. So there's kind of the eyeball test. Ashby's is good before and good after, and he's got actually some innings in him, right?
Yeah, he had 95 innings in 2021, but I think more importantly, Aaron Ashby threw 126 innings back in 2019.
I think that matters too. Yeah.
Your previous high is probably where you can project a ceiling from. You take that, and if you're going to add 20% to a workload a pitcher has been able to hold up with before, tack 20% onto that 126, and that probably gives you a better idea what they're aiming for. Obviously, looking at some of these more granular things along the way to make sure that it's smart and reasonably, properly guided to keep going down the path they're going down.
Yeah, and I think there's also a sort of a switch that gets flipped where there must be some sort of number where you get to and they just don't care, because I'm looking at Shane McClanahan, and one of the reasons I did put him a little lower was I thought maybe they would play some games with him, try to keep his number down. In 2021, he had 123 innings, but he also had postseason.
Yeah, a few more in the
So
postseason.
128. Let's give him 130 innings. Do we think he's actually going to be limited? So if you do 130, and you give him the extra quarter, that's only 162 innings. So that would say that he have as many innings left as Spencer Strider, but that doesn't seem right. And then if you look at his stuff plus, if you use that as like a tracking, he's up.
But
So
I do think the Strider thinking with McClanahan is sort of right, because they want him to be fresh in October. It's not that they're not going to let him work every fifth day. It's that whenever they can, if they can get him out after 5 innings, if they get a big lead, all right, let's just take a little off McClanahan. I think
he's
it's
doing
more
6s
like
and
that.
7s right now.
Yeah.
Maybe it just becomes more 5s before. Like how he started the season. That's interesting. He started the season 4.1, 4.2, had 2 5s in the and the next 4 starts, and then started settling into 6 and 7, right? So maybe that's how we'll see him end the season. 4s and 5s.
Or some 4s and 5s in August, and then some more 6s once you get to late September. That way you're not hitting that level of fatigue again and start.
Unless something, unless the stuff plus, unless the velocity, unless the release point drops, they're tracking all these things. If there isn't any of that, they also want to win games and try to win the division, improve their wild card bye and all that stuff. Their wild card seeding. They're not going to want to rest him. Just be like, hey, 2 weeks off, phantom IL. I don't think, right?
No, I don't think they'll do that.
They have to kind of build back up and everything. It's not good for them to stop.
This to me though is one of the things we have to guess on the most, which is just terrible because situations can vary so much on an individual level. If you're worried about Tarek Skubal, you probably shouldn't be. 149 in the 3rd innings a year ago, he should be fine. Josiah Gray's another guy.
You should be worried about the fact that he's not as good as his numbers, but that's.
But he was pitching well at the beginning of the season. Hit a bit of a rough patch. It's still up and down with Skubal because he's still making adjustments, still figuring some things out. But Josiah Gray is one of the younger starters. If you're getting cheap strikeouts from him in a deeper league, 92 innings already. Nationals aren't going anywhere. There could be an easy early shutdown case for Gray at some point. So it might not be this in-start workloads, kind of like we talked about with Contreras. It might just be that the time that you're using him ends up falling a little bit short, which is disappointing, but understandable at the same time.
I think I made a mistake. I think in sort of like NFBC formats where you have the short bench, 5 to 7 or whatever, if you have a short bench and Contreras gets sent down or Strider goes on a short-term IL or one of these young guys, when they do that, I think you should actually drop them. I think it would be hardest with like Strider, but like with Contreras, I think I made a mistake. I think I should have used the flexibility and dropped Contreras. Now I'm sort of made the decision, so I'm going to wait for some news in the next week or something, and I assume that I'll hear some news about him coming back up. But same time, like I think if you have a short bench and they're starting to play with them, you just don't know what the end result of that playing with them is. And if they're already over the innings they've done in the past, and especially if they're not on a good team like Contreras, I think that's a sort of perfect storm where you say, I love you, Contreras, and keeper in dynasty leagues. I'm still acquiring if I'm not going to win this year. I still want to hold you if I can hold and win. But in sort of redraft with short bench, I don't know what your future looks like. I should just move on and be more flexible and have someone who can help me now, So I know that doesn't help you so much with Strider. It doesn't help you at all with Shane McClanahan. I can't imagine telling someone. Would you tell somebody who's in a head-to-head league and they're worried about what the end of the year looks like for McClanahan that they should trade McClanahan for a veteran?
No.
Yeah, no, I can't do it.
I wouldn't be doing that. Now, I think the other question is, so what other corrective actions are there? What else can you do right now? I mean, I'm thinking about my Tout Wars team might be something similar to what other people are dealing with, where you have multiple pitchers we're talking about. You have some combination of 2 or 3 of these pitchers. I have Strider, Gore, and Kirby all on that team. Hey, good job with young pitching so far. Problem is, you're not going to have nearly the volume you want in the rest of the season. So I've been trying to make those moves, trying to add guys like Framber Valdez and make trades, flipping bats for arms, knowing that if I don't have more stability in that group of pitching, I am going to be chasing so hard on the waiver wire in the final 6 weeks of the season that my ratios will be in danger.
You'll have no money.
I won't have any fab money left. So you do have to start thinking about how you're going to manage this now. I realize if you're in a league like NFBC leagues with no trades, that becomes challenging.
But you still have to think about it like I'm talking about with Contreras. Like, you probably should just move on. Kirby is down too, but I don't know. Kirby's performance has been better. Kirby's team is better. It just seems like they need him. It seems like he'll just be back up again. Contreras, I think, could hit some number and just be shut down.
Yeah, that's exactly how I see him right now. I just see a guy that
if he gets to 100, what did you say he had 60 last year? I think if he gets to 100, that's more than adding 25%. And it puts him on a progression where next year he could do 130 or 140, and then he could maybe be established as more of a veteran, can make it through the season type guy, right? Yeah. So I think he could get to 100, and that's it. So now I'm talking about, I might only get 25 more innings out of him. Why did I keep him while he was down? So I think I did mess that one up. But yeah, when it comes to Kirby, I would hold. When it comes to Strider, I would hold. But if you are in teams that allow for trades, and if you are in head-to-head leagues, I think it's very likely that Strider moves to the bullpen for the playoffs.
All the way to the pen, really?
Yeah, because and maybe he can be a guy who gives them 1 or 2 innings, but just imagine that you have your veteran guys, and then you have Strider coming into the 3rd or 4th inning in a wild card game. You know what I mean? Just blow the doors off the other team, right? So, and I don't think that he necessarily has the innings to start all the way through the playoffs. And he also started the season as a reliever. So, what was his conditioning like going into the season? How many innings did he think he could get this season? How many innings did the team think that he could get this season? All those things matter because, he's running up closer to where he was before. And then they also have good other players, right? So I would be a little bit worried in a head-to-head league redraft where I had Strider. Wouldn't you?
Well, for sure. Just because it's going to be an unusual shape of those innings, regardless of the role they see for him in the postseason. He's a part of their plan.
That you just hold on to it and just say, hey, if he's a reliever, then I got a guy who's going to strike out 14 guys per 9 as a reliever.
But you're still realizing right now you're probably going to need one more good starter once you get to that point in your season. It's not just this group of young pitchers, though. I mean, think about Justin Verlander, Luis Severino, Noah Syndergaard. I think Carlos Rodon, to some extent, kind of belongs in this group of guys that have had big injuries in the past that year over year we're still worried about workload. I think Michaelis and Tony Gonsolin are 2 big success stories this year. I mentioned earlier, Nestor Cortes doesn't really have the big injury, but it's more of the what happens to him. Where does his stuff go? So as you look at this group of pitchers, the more established guys that you're not necessarily backing off of as an organization because they haven't done it at some point in the past, but just the sweet spot of making sure they're as effective as you want them to be. Is there anybody from that group that really stands out to you as potentially problematic?
It's amazing that you just named 3 names and you said Verlander too. So that's 4 names.
Verlander, Severino, Syndergaard, Michaelis, Gonsolin, Nestor, 6 names, whole 6-pack.
Okay. Severino. Let me see. Okay. Severino is down in Stuff Plus, but he's still at 109 Stuff Plus. So he's still in a good spot. The other 4, the other 5, all up in Stuff Plus. It kind of gives me that feeling of this is the good year. You know what I mean? They are feeling good. This is the good year. And in terms of what the team's going to do with them, I can't imagine they're going to limit them. Some of those guys are in walk years of the contracts. They don't want to be limited. Verlander, Rodon, they don't want to be limited. They want to put as many innings up as possible because they're going to go back on the market next year.
Syndergaard's on a 1-year deal, so he probably wants to just keep going.
I think Syndergaard's stuff is down. That's amazing. That's surprising. I've seen him he's throwing things other than his fastball, but just generally his stuff is not good this year. But I think that a lot of the veterans, they, you know, what you were talking about with like the past previous career high. I think with veterans, they look a little bit more to like what do they do before this injury? What were they doing consistently before? What you know, what is a reasonable expectation from them in a healthy season?
Gonsolin, as one example, had 128 innings way back in 2018, 26 starts that year between high A and double A. So you push him to 150, 160, and you say, yeah, we're comfortable with that. And they've got a lot of depth. They've got a lot of things they can do to manipulate the roster if they want to. But the other thing with Gonsolin is, I mean, he's been amazing. 2.02 ERA, 0.84 WHIP so far, 11 wins, just an absurd fantasy value to this point in the season. Regression is coming for Tony Gonsolin regardless. Even if we didn't have these workload concerns, we'd be looking at him and saying,
the All-Star game.
yeah, like if that didn't happen, you'd say, 350 ERA, 120-ish WHIP, and a decent strikeout rate. That's probably what you should be expecting from Gonsolin, despite how great he has been up to this point.
I did want to bring up a possible strategy with regards to what we're talking about here, which is I think there's a possibility that maybe you should just keep all these guys while they're pitching, not worry about tomorrow, and then when the time does come that they are shut down and you have lost them, replace them with middle relievers. And the reason I say this is there's a great piece by Mike Gianella up on Baseball Prospectus where he looks at in-season waiver wire pickups and where the production comes from on the pitching side. Obviously, the top group is starting pitchers. The 10 best starting pitchers that picked up this year on the wire, they're producing the most value. Miles Michaelis, right? That makes sense. So bulk innings, picked him up on the wire. He helps you in so many places, Ks, ERA, all that stuff. Great. The next group, and this is the next group of pitchers that has given the most value, were the top 10 middle relievers picked up this season.
I just think that's such a hard group of players to squeeze the value out of, though, because the calculators looking back are always going to lean heavily on those guys because the wins come through, right? I think predicting that is very difficult. Maybe not impossible, but very difficult. And you can start to get a sense of the good teams and how they use guys on a week-by-week basis. You can look and see maybe on Sunday, you say, oh, actually, it's been 3 or 4 days since Michael King pitched, didn't pitch Sunday. Okay, this is a week to add Michael King because early in the week, he's going to get a pretty big cluster of innings. Maybe you can micromanage it.
I played that game with Keegan Aiken a little bit. The only retort I have is this. The worst group of waiver wire pickups were the worst starters. Because now you got bulk bad. Yep. You know what I mean? And if you've been streaming 2-start starters or been scrambling for Ks, then you know. Because, you know, I picked up Michael Pineda in at least one team for that 2-start where he was just the poop. I mean, did you see that one? It was like he had like 4 innings against the Royals, and I was like, and like 3 strikeouts in one of the starts, and the other start he gave up like 5 runs and 4 innings, and I was just like, oh man, why did I do that? Anyway, my point is that it does represent an avenue where you can say, you know, maybe I won't go that far in wins, but maybe these young guys and these good starters that I have right now, Kirby, Strider, maybe these guys will give me some padding in wins. And then I can just get somebody that'll pitch in the middle innings that won't necessarily get me saves, but will get me a smattering of Ws, and we'll have like a 12 K9, and just will probably keep me afloat in the strikeout rate. Maybe I'm running out of innings too. You know, like maybe you have an innings cap and you just want to get the most excellent innings out of Kirby and Strider, et cetera, while they're in. And then you just put in some middle relievers at the very end just to make the best use of the remaining innings you have left. I just wanted to throw that out there as a strategy because there's going to be an idea where you have to panic. I've lost Strider, I've lost Kirby. What do I do? I'm going to go out and buy a starting pitcher. I just wanted to throw that kernel of an idea in there that you could just buy a reliever.
Yeah, Ronaldo Lopez probably becomes your friend, especially in those innings cap situations you were just describing, because in a lot of ways it looks like a really good starter for you. It's just over a much smaller volume of innings. I think the other thing to think about too, when you imagine where some of the waiver wire value comes from, small amounts of waiver wire value, late season streaming becomes a bit easier because the bad teams get worse. And there are even some middle of the pack teams that sink quite a bit because they have some players that start to get shut down. So it becomes a little
Shut
easier.
down to injury, traded away.
Yeah, just to throw the Michael Pineda volume play that burned you, or similar plays that have burned all of us at some point this year.
Could be better later in the season.
You're less likely
they
to
don't
get
have
Benintendi
on the Royals anymore.
Yep, you get more quad A type players in lineups at that point in the season, and that I think makes volume streaming a little bit safer than it might be at this point in the season.
It's possible. I wanted to maybe throw some names out there. I think what you're looking for are relievers on good teams that are like the third or fourth best reliever. So it has to be a really good enough bullpen where the fourth reliever is pretty good, because that fourth reliever is the one coming in maybe in the fifth or sixth and vulturing that win. So names that come to mind are like Drew Smith, maybe Colin McHugh. Who's the guy on the Brewers? I can just throw that one to you.
It's not as easy as it has been in recent years. Suter's been getting hit. It was kind of Suter as the glue guy for a while. I think they have to trade for that guy. Maybe Gustave could be that guy. Milner's a little bit of a specialist.
Milner's stuff has been surging a little bit.
Gott could be that guy. The Brewers don't have it quite the same way that they have in recent years.
And they actually, they're built a little differently where they have like the A squad anyway, and they don't, like, their fifth reliever has not always been that great. They kind of always had like the star three or whatever.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the Giants have someone like that.
I was thinking on the Yankees that Chapman could become that. I mean, they're looking for a way to use him, right? I think on the Astros, it's Phil Maton.
Yep.
Yeah, he comes in. I mean, Brian Abreu comes in sometimes too. One of those two is an interesting play. Ronaldo Lopez is the obvious one, I think, on the White Sox. Ooh, the Dodgers have to have one.
The Rangers have one with Brock Burke. He's been really good so far.
Phil Bickford was better. Maybe when Trinan comes back. Gratterall's so up and down. I've seen Price vulture some wins in LA.
That's still like I don't know. I think the group of pitchers that meet this criteria is smaller than you would think.
I got one. Matt Brash.
Yeah, that could work.
They're using him in multi-inning because he still has a little bit of that starter buildup in him. I think Matt Brash is a good pickup for people that are looking for this sort of thing.
And they're so deep with late inning arms too that you don't really see him ascending in the other direction to become a source of saves at the present time.
Yeah, and for those leagues where you have the SBRP, he's become valuable again, where now you're just using him for reliever stats out of a starting pitching slot.
As far as starters being used like regular starters, you mentioned a name before we started recording that I've seen available in a good number of leagues because, well, it's been ugly. And I know we talked about him at some point in the last 6 or 8 weeks or so. Aaron Civale. I mean, if you're just the kind of person that this time of year, you're looking at ERA and you're looking at some of the predictive, the skills-based numbers, not predictive, but the skills-based numbers like Sierra, there's a big gap. A 394 Sierra is actually a career best for Aaron Civale, but he's got a 6.17 ERA and a terrible whip. It's been strikeout per inning stuff so far. Home run rate's actually a tick better than it was last year. I mean, there are some positives here. And as we know, in the AL Central especially, there are some pretty favorable spots to use him. So I could see Civale being quietly a nice pickup and there's plenty of runway in terms of innings left on his arm.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a piece about underutilized pitches, and one of the things that came up was the slider that he has that was rated well, and he's not using it. He's not using that much. Actually, I think it was the cutter. But I was pointing out that, like, I don't know if he has a cutter and a slider because they're actually pretty similar in what they look like. And I'm not suggesting that Civale is a reader, but the cutter's gone through the roof and he stopped using the slider completely. And it's been wonders for his Stuff Plus. His Stuff Plus is now 106 in the last month. He's one of the top 5 surgers among starting pitchers, and it's a new mix. And that's like 1.0 for me. Was one of the first things I ever did was look at players that are pitching differently and then look at their mix. And so he went from using the slider and cutter, using the slider more than the cutter, to now you're not using the slider at all and using the cutter about twice as much as he used to. Now he's cutter, sinker, curveball with some four seams mixed in, I think, for whiffs at the top of the zone. And I think that could actually work. And one of the reasons I like that is the cutter is further away in shape than it was from the slider. It is from the curveball, right? So cutter, if you think about shapes and if you think about mechanics and you think about doing this, cutter is going to be very different from curveball in terms of mechanics. It's not going to blend together. It's not going to become the same pitch. Cutter, curveball, sinker also gives you something against lefties. And it keeps people off of your fastball, because right now he's throwing the cutter, the curve, and the sinker all 30% of the time. So I think that's actually, a way that it can work for him. And I think he's absolutely someone to pick up off the wire. Maybe depending on schedule. I would maybe have an eye for the schedule, but he's one of my favorites. I did a little look at surging Stuff Plus numbers, and I've got a couple names off here that he's one of the better ones.
Keep in mind that Civale left to start last week with a wrist injury, so he's expected to be out until the end of this month. So it's a possible cheap pickup now, but you may have to hold him for a week or two before he's ready again, or you can just wait until he's actually healthy and make that move in some more shallow leagues.
Here's one that's starting that maybe you can actually just even pick up for this weekend, depending on the rules of your team. And this is one I'm excited about. Short term, long term, maybe, but still fairly excited about this guy, Braxton Garrett. And the reason I'm excited is his Stuff Plus is also up about 6.5. And what's so great about that is he's a guy who's demonstrated good command. He's had good command, and now his Stuff Plus is 99. And now that doesn't sound like super exciting. But for starting pitchers, that's, I would say, a slightly above average. I think starting pitchers are around 97, 98, because Stuff Plus doesn't care about what your role is necessarily when it just puts a number on there. So, Braxton Garrett now has slightly above average stuff, great command, I would say, and a really good home park. Most of the matchups look good. Would I throw him in Philadelphia yet? I don't know. But
you would not.
I mean, it's getting closer and closer to that point where I just like him enough. And so let that be sort of a clue as to how much I like him. I mean, I picked him up in a ton of NFBC formats, and I think he's one of the better pickups out there right now.
Yeah, definitely an interesting name, because the home streaming potential is very high when you're talking about someone that locates well and gets to make half of his starts in that nice pitcher-friendly ballpark in Miami. Anybody else that really popped for you as far as help on the pitching front, potentially, from the traditional starter workload perspective?
I think Ross Stripling doesn't really have limits. I know I'm not looking at his player card right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't have a ton of innings last year. But he's a little bit more like what we've talked about, where he's had innings before. And I also, like, from a team standpoint, I don't think you're like, boy, we better make sure Ross Stripling doesn't get hurt. I think you're just like, hey, he's a veteran, we need him. And he's pitching well. His stuff has surged 8.5 points all the way up to 98 with a little bit of pitch mix stuff. His changeup, and I talked to him about this recently, where he changed his changeup grip. It's the best changeup he's had, I think, in his career. So now he's got a legit changeup. He's worked his cutter, he's worked his breaking stuff to the point where it's pretty good, and he's got a wide array of pitches, good command of those pitches. So I think he's a really good pickup. He's also like the opposite of Garrett, where it's just awful matchups. So I guess I'd be careful. I'd rather have a bench spot where and the ability to put him on my bench and not have to start him all the time, basically. But Jackson Kowar, for you super deep leaguers, came up and had a completely different fastball and a completely different slider, a whole new release point. He has awful command. And so that's going to make him just a wild ride, but for the deepest leaguers out there, especially as a stash. And then I like Edward Cabrera as a stuff plus surger that deep leaguers could jump on. He's an interesting guy to also think about acquiring if you're rebuilding, to think about for the future, because it's not completely sure where he is. And then lastly, just two kind of guys that are up and down on waiver wires in 10 and 12 team leagues, even 15 team leagues. They're surging in stuff plus, though. They're on teams that need them. They are pitching a little deeper into games. Chris Archer and Marco Gonzalez are disrespected individuals. And their pitching plus is still way too close to average, but their stuff plus has climbed up. They're obviously flawed pitchers, but I like them more than I did at the beginning of the season. And Marco Gonzalez in particular will give you decisions. If you just need decisions, they leave him in a really long time. He's been the leader in decisions, I think, over the last 3 years. Chris Archer is a little bit more like, I need strikeouts and I need them in bulk, and maybe I'll start him every time he has 2 starts and get 8 to 10 strikeouts.
And the ratios might not be bad from Archer, too, because of the way they're using him. 3.41 ERA, 126 whip so far this season. You mentioned the usage being slightly better. Since June 2nd, he's made, I think, 7 starts now, and 3 of those have gone 5 innings. Doesn't go much further than 5. Hasn't gone further than 5 all year, but all of those starts have been in that span. He didn't make any starts like that through the first 2 months of the season. So it is more of a deep league play, but I have found myself clinging to Archer in a lot of 15-team leagues where I'm desperate for pitching, and I think the second half could end up being a little better than the first half just in terms of that workload based on those recent trends. I know he got scooped up over the weekend, so we haven't really done as much to help anyone by talking about him as far as like making a move, but Max Meyer's numbers looked really good in the pitching model coming off that debut.
Yeah, and I think that's an opportunity to buy because his team is looking at numbers like that. They're and it's one of those situations where other people would just say, "Oh, he's no good. Look at his debut," but the underlying numbers were very exciting, and they poured it over from the minor leagues.
Repeat on repeat, the Jose Urquidy faith remains strong on this pod.
I'm looking at his page right now, and I'm like, trying to figure out how to lead him. Yeah, just on repeat. That's pretty good.
It's just on repeat. He's still showing up. We're still trying to figure out when it's going to happen.
Surging and stuff. Plus,
fantastic. The Max Meyer thing, though, that's kind of like good, is that because he already missed some time in the minors, you might not have that slam on the brakes with the workload at the end of this season. He threw 114 innings last season. No, that's 111 innings. Math is fun.
That's not bad.
Not bad, right? So he's probably looking at the 140, 150 range. And so far this year, he is under 70 across all stops.
I think the dark horse in the trade deadline is the Marlins trading a starting pitcher.
I think they don't have to do it, but it'd be weird if they didn't, given the league-wide need for pitching and the possibility that a team is desperate enough to maybe even overpay to get it.
I mean, just Pablo Lopez, like this is peak value for Pablo Lopez. I just feel like, you know, there is always like in the offseason, you get more suitors, right? So you could have more demand. However, the more suitors that you gain in the offseason, these sort of theoretical group of more suitors also includes a lot of teams that aren't going to be suitors in the offseason either. You know what I mean? Like you can say something pithy like, oh, in the offseason, you know, 30 teams that or 29 teams that could be interested, right? Not really. You know, the Orioles aren't going to buy now and they're not going to buy in the offseason either. You know, so like, could you add 3 or 4 teams? Maybe. However, on the flip side, you get so much more desperation, you know, from in-season trades. So if you could go get Pablo Lopez right now and get him for this playoff appearance and still convince your owners that or wherever that it's for the future and you know you've got him for more teams, man, I think you might get more for him at the trade deadline than you will in the offseason. In the offseason, you also have more sellers, you have more suitors, you have just more possibilities in all directions. So I think that's the time to strike for them. And if they do that, then Edward Cabrera and Max Meyer both get, and Braxton Garrett all still are in the rotation.
Yeah, and eventually, you know, Yuri Perez, a big part of that rotation there, probably early next season, looked really good at the Futures game. But Pablo Lopez is the guy that makes a lot of sense, and he's complicated because we haven't seen him log a full healthy season as a big league starter before. At 104 innings right now, it's the second highest big league total in the last 4 years. Kind of came up in 2018, didn't have a chance at a full season that year, of course, but makes a lot of sense if he's the guy that they're going to move and would bring back a lot because he's not a rental, which is really nice for the teams that acquire him. Yeah, it happens. All right, let's do relievers real quick. Any relievers that are popping for you right now? Short relievers?
Yeah, I had a lot of John Schreiber pickups, but if you've been listening to this, I think you knew about John Schreiber. One interesting name that doesn't show up, and I know Tampa is just a total mess. But Calvin Fauché, really, Stuff Plus loves him. 157 Stuff Plus. I like the fact that he's a righty. And I know that they've been giving lefties some saves, and they have multiple lefties, so they don't have to save a lefty. But at the same time, like, I think that you would play the matchups, and it's more likely that you have a righty hitting at the end of a game because it's just more likely. You know, there are more righties. And so therefore, I think Calvin Fauché and Jason Adam, you know, are going to be guys that are more likely to be used for a save, right?
I'm looking at the last 2 weeks worth of games. They've got a handful of saves during that time. You go backwards. It's Adam most recently, then it was Rayleigh the game before that, Beeks the game before that, Poche before Beeks, back to Rayleigh, and then it was Adam. Adam like
lefty
9
too,
days
right?
before that. Yeah, so Rayleigh's another lefty.
And then you throw an Adam in again. I don't know, man. I have some shares of Adam. I don't actually have any shares of lefties. I'm playing it the way that I'm telling you, right? You know, like I'm not telling you one thing and doing something else on the, you know, in my teams. I have Adam, and I'm looking at Fauché. So maybe I'm wrong. You know, I also think Fire Eisen's going to come back at some point, and he was getting saves. So it's an interesting group.
I think we talked about Joe Barlow.
Who do you want?
I don't want Brett Martin. At least I don't, because I believe in Barlow getting the job back for reasons we've discussed before. Like there should have been an uptick in Ks. But the question for you is Brett Martin just good enough to keep the job no matter how much we believe in Joe Barlow's skills? And if the Rangers are a team that don't mix and match, then it doesn't matter. They just have two good relievers and they're using the other guy to close instead of the guy we want to close.
I could see them actually sort of pairing the two when they come back. I mean, is a lefty-righty situation there. Brett Martin is surging in Stuff Plus, but he surged from 113 to 115, so it's not a game changer necessarily. But I have picked up some Brett Martin, and there is a situation where he just keeps the gig. One slight note is that, you know, they're a team that spent a lot of money, and they could want to keep Barlow cheap. I mean, it's a possibility. If you spread the saves apart, then you keep them cheaper.
Yes, that is always a concern, but I'm not worried too much about it in that particular instance. I was looking at the Diamondbacks. I couldn't come up with a name that I actually liked there. Joe Mantiply is having a nice year, but
he's an all-star, dude. What are you talking about?
But do you really trust it? It's a great story.
I don't actually, and they keep giving Mark Melancon. They still give him opportunities.
It's such a bad idea. The Paul Sewald situation, that just he's the guy in Seattle. So he's gone. He's been picked up for weeks. I'm not really chasing there. I think the Marlins bullpen has been a bit of a mystery all season. I know they just traded for Tanner Scott to get him from Baltimore when the season began, but if they're shuffling players around at the deadline, Steven Okert could be pretty interesting. I know the model really likes him. I think he's one of the best lefty relievers in the entire model, and probably the best available to trade deadline lefty if they trade him and just keep Scott. So I think there's a path for Okert to become more valuable, though I think it's more likely if they trade someone in front of him as opposed to a different team trading for him for the purpose of making him their closer.
Can I just say something real quick? God, man, being a reliever,
it's terrible.
A hard life. Look at this. He has 142 games in the major leagues, spread out over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons. He's been in the major leagues for 6 seasons, has 142 games. Guess when he's a free agent?
2027.
He has 1 year of service time.
Yeah, this is the other. So we talk about the guys that shuttle up and down, in terms of just how difficult that is to just deal with that. But this is the other part of that player's profile that's absurd, is that he wouldn't become a free agent until he's 31 years old now. He turned 31 a couple of weeks ago.
He'll never be a free agent.
He'll be 35 years old when he becomes a free agent. That's absurd.
I do have some hope for Bender actually getting the job back, and he did begin a rehab assignment. And the model still liked him, although not as much as last year. He was a little bit of a dropper, and I wonder how much the back had to do with that. And they have a bunch of guys that are pretty decent in the model. I think they follow something like this, because Anthony Bass 109 stuff plus, Floro 105 stuff plus, Okert 133 stuff plus, and Scott has always popped in this 126 stuff plus. The thing that Scott doesn't have that the rest of them do have is command. So I actually think he's on fairly shaky ground, not for a few reasons: trade, command, and then also just general excellence of the other pitchers. So Tanner Scott is the guy to have right now, but if you were in a position where you could trade away saves and someone wanted Tanner Scott, I would trade away Tanner Scott.
Seems pretty reasonable to me to make that move.
I think Bender's my pickup there behind him, though.
I think the Yuri De Los Santos in Pittsburgh is interesting. If they were to decide to move David Bednar, I think De Los Santos is the guy.
I don't think they're going to move David Bednar, and I don't think they're going to shut him down either. They were using him 2 inning stints and stuff. I think Bednar is their all-star. They want to have something nice that comes out of this year. I think he's good all the way through.
We shall see. I had a mailbag question come in about a pitcher you didn't mention when we were digging on the waiver wire group. Glenn Otto, who I think at one point had some pretty nice numbers in the model and still isn't bad, but this is becoming more of a maybe what we saw at first is just not indicative of what he brings to the table. So in deep leagues, this question came in from Tom. Do you see anything in the profile with Glenn Otto that makes you think he will be a successful big league starter?
I like his starts at home against Oakland.
Oh, okay.
Damning with faint praise, I guess. He's a loser over the past month in the model in terms of stuff plus. He's dropped nearly 1.5 points of stuff plus, and generally none of his numbers now is over 100 in terms of command, location stuff. I like his slider, and anybody who has a 135 stuff plus slider can be on my team. And then the knuckle curve still rates as an above average pitch overall in stuff and locations, but the fastballs don't look good. And the sinker's a little bit better than the four seam, but he doesn't locate the sinker well. So he's gonna have to figure something out, and I think it might be just location of the fastball. And if he starts locating the fastball better, we can, I think, pay more attention again.
I think you are describing someone who's going to be a very good reliever, because you give him a couple more ticks and consider
Drop
him
the
as
changeup, which he does is not very good, and
right. Increase the knuckle curve, and then fastball plays up a little bit, and maybe you still have an occasional third pitch. It's a pretty nice late inning weapon.
Still, having two breaking balls that are above average gives you still a chance. I think he's the kind of guy that I would love to try again in reserve rounds and bench rounds next year, But this year, I'm just not seeing him as much more than the matchups play.
Tom has him AL only, $3 as a keeper. I don't know if he's necessarily a keeper based on what we've seen so far. Probably a reserve for the rest of this season, or in
I would
and out
buy
of
him
the lineup
again next year for $1. I feel like I don't think after this season he's going to be much more than $1 play next year, right? So I think I would just try to buy him again next year for. There's something there that is interesting, but it doesn't seem like a keeper to me.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it as it goes with Glenn Otto. The other pitcher that people were asking about, Nestor Cortes, kind of fits into the broader conversation we were having, right? Gets to be an all-star. And I think the more I think about the all-star game and my general lean that it should be a snapshot of the past calendar year and just feature the best players in the game at that time, I do think you need a little bit of the surprise player mixed in too. And Nestor Cortes is a pretty good example of the reason why. As you think about what the second half of his season might look like, as the innings continue to pile up, is there any sign of Cortes slowing down based on how he's looked going into the break? Because the numbers look even better this year than they did a season ago when he moved into this role.
Yeah, he's a stuff plus surger. I think it's mostly based on the fact that he's throwing that sweeper slider more. And I didn't spot it. I think I might have even had him on a leaderboard somewhere when I was writing about the sweeper, but he is a really excellent sweeper. And when I talked to him at the All-Star game, he said that the reason that he broke out this year, or just he broke out with the Yankees in general, is they taught him the sweeper. So between the four-seam, cutter, and sweeper, I think there are other mixes he can do. He's had mixes before where he threw the cutter less than the slider, and he hasn't done that this year yet. So I think he's got a couple more wrinkles, and I mean it that way, like sort of literally and figuratively, because he still has all that deception when it comes to his delivery. And he said he's always had natural command. And one thing that he also pointed out to me in the interview was that he always had excellent numbers in the minors, and that it was just about porting them over. And I guess I sort of missed that. They're not always incredible, but ever since he joined ever since he sort of hit the Yankees upper levels, they have actually been very good. His first real try at AAA, he had a 1.49 ERA with a 10.6 strikeouts per nine in 48 innings. And then the second time he did AAA, he repeated it just with fewer strikeouts and a little bit higher ERA. But yeah, I think he's probably been excellent since they added the sweeper. And so I guess I kind of believe in him. I don't believe him in this sort of below 3 ERA, but of the different projection systems, I will take the bats at the very least. 3.72 ERA, 113 WHIP, almost 10 K9.
All right,
that's really nice.
You're not that worried about the innings piling up on him then?
I mean, he had 93 he had more than 93. He had 108 last year.
Yeah, 108 plus anything in the playoffs.
And in 2019, before he even got there, it was He was over 100. He had 111 in 28. No, he had 120 almost in 108 in 2018. So also just doesn't I don't know.
It's 27. Let him go. But I don't think.
Exactly.
I mean, you think about players that are the opposite of the modern fireballing pitcher, and Nestor Cortes is kind of the opposite of that guy, right? He's not your 6'4" guy that throws 99 all the time. He doesn't throw 99 ever. He's this 5'11", more finesse lefty that commands stuff really well and just seems to have everything kind of working together in sync. It's exactly the kind of profile that people can overlook because he's not the prototype. He's not the pitcher you'd create in a lab or create on MLB The Show from a physical standpoint.
And physically, he also doesn't remind me of Andy Pettitte at all, but generally there's a little bit of Andy Pettitte there for me. Sweeping slider, lefty, good command, some up and down results. So I think this is a thing that can work. And I think that, the big thing is that the stadium there actually plays best to lefties because the short porch is in right field. Lefties at the plate.
Right.
So a lefty on the mound that can reduce the efficacy of those lefties at the plate can actually pitch pretty well at home.
Yeah, interesting guy. And I think compared to a lot of the other pitchers we discussed in the show that we really like, a little easier to go trade for because you might actually have someone who rosters Nestor Cortes currently expecting things to fall apart a bit in the second half. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. Weird schedule this week, thanks to the airlines, but glad Eno made it back safely from Los Angeles. We will have another episode coming up on Friday. Be sure to leave us a nice rating and review if you're listening to this podcast on Apple or Spotify or any platform where you're able to do that. If you got questions for a future episode, Rates and Barrels at theathletic.com is the best way to get those our way. If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Friday.
Thanks for listening.